Abracadabra. You learned it as a kid, a silly syllable you waved like a cheap wand, but in older tongues, that sequence of sounds carries a sentence. I create as I speak. Hold that line in your mouth for a moment. Not a trick, not a parlor game, a design principle, a tiny machine of reality. If one childish word functions as a manual for creation, what is every other word in your life quietly doing to the wiring of your mind? This is not an exercise in wordplay for the clever. This is an urgent map. Words are not wallpaper for thoughts. They are the architecture beneath them. Grammar is a grimoire. Syntax is the plumbing of perception. The way we name things, the small habits we form with verbs and tenses, the casual metaphors we inherit from school, church, law, and media, these are not neutral. They exert force. They tune you, they program expectation. The same languages that teach you to be polite or productive also quietly teach compliance, containment, and consent. I will show you how. I will take you through banks and boardrooms, hospitals and classrooms, churches and courts. I will show you how identical patterns recur across institutions: flow, containment, reversal, subject removal, until you see the same engineering principle repeated like a leitmotif. I will give you tools to reclaim the register of your life, simple, immediate shifts you can make to speak differently and therefore live differently. This is not mystical abstraction, it is practical sovereignty. But first, you must see the mechanism. Listen to money. Currency. Say the word aloud. Currency. It sits on a root that rhymes with current. Current is flow. Currency is the designation of flow. Money is not merely a thing, it is directed motion. Follow the metaphor. A river needs banks. The bank is the edge of the flow, and in our language the bank is also the institution that holds the current. Bank, riverbank, institution, not accidental. The image of holding a river maps onto the modern business of holding and redirecting value. When we call a place where money is stored a bank, we inherit a structure of meanings that primes us to think in currents and edges, not in sources. Look at mortgage. Mortgage is read by many as death pledge in popular etymology, interpretive folk etymology. Whether that literal derivation is a clean scholarly fact or a powerful folk reading matters less than its force as a lens. Mortgage carries weight in its syllables. A pledged house, a commitment that ties the future of your shelter to a ledger. What does that language teach? It trains people to embed their living into an obligation whose vocabulary normalizes the pledge itself. You sign, you pledge, your future income flows to satisfy a debt named by the word. The name helps the system hold you. Salary takes us to salt. Salarium in older languages pointed to pay given for salt, an essential commodity. Think of the image, your daily sustenance converted into wages named after a preservative. Work becomes preservative, a way to keep life from spoiling. Interest. What does that word do? Interest sits in that space between. Literally, in older morphological readings, it suggests what stands between parties, again measured as space. Credit. Who is crediting you? What is the social judgment embedded in creditworthy? All these small semantic gears encourage certain behaviors. Predictable labor for predictable pay, preservation over creativity, deferment over present sovereignty. Words teach bodies how to orient a life. They map obligations onto the future. They hollow agency out of the present by turning living into a ledger. Put another way, financial language trains you to see life as a stream to be managed and tapped, rather than as a river you could redirect. The metaphors shape the moves available to you. But currency is only one of the channels. The same patterns appear in the language of work. Listen to occupation. At face value, it's a neutral description of a job. Etymologically, there are threads linking occupation to military occupation in Latin roots, interpretive folk etymology. The same word for taking possession migrates into our modern vocabulary as a normal descriptor. I am occupied with this task. You are occupied, and occupation implies a presence that is not yours. You are occupied by an external order. Employee, ply, plied. Here we get literal craft images. To be employed is to be made pliant, to be worked upon. The older root meanings of ply include to fold, to weave, to be used repeatedly. Interpretive, folk etymology. Picture a loom. Threads pass through the shuttle again and again. A worker becomes thread. A corporation becomes the loom. Busyness, business. Business is not merely activity, it is being busy. Busyness is a manufactured identity. It tells you to measure worth by the intensity of your motion. Corporation deserves a close look. Corporation. Corpus. Body. Legal persons called corporations are bodies on paper. They are animated legal entities. Bodies granted agency in courts and markets, often outliving the humans that assembled them. That legal life is fed by human labor, attention, and sometimes debt. The metaphor flips. People become resources for the legal body. The legal body, called into life by language and certificate, consumes the vitality of living beings. Corporate law instruments name and enable that animation. The language makes the corpse legal and the living subordinate. And language here does more than describe, it prescribes roles. When you call yourself an employee, when your title begins with assistant or associate, you adopt a taxonomy that narrows the range of your perceived options. To be assigned a title is to be given a script. They teach titles to children and institutionalize them so thoroughly that self-identity becomes indistinguishable from occupational designation. So when you say, I am an employee, who is speaking and who is being spoken to? Are you naming yourself in the voice of an institution that learned how to name people centuries ago? Or are you choosing a register that affirms your agency? This is not guilt-laden finger-pointing. It is noticing. It is the first step to changing a habit that shaped entire lifetimes. If this is landing with you, drop one word in the comments. The single word in your life that, if reframed, would change everything. Tell me which one hit you hardest and why. I'll read as many as I can. Now move with me into law and civic life. These are places where language is not poetic, it's performative. A name in all caps on a signature line is not just a typographic choice. It signals the activation of a legal fiction. Your name on a piece of paper becomes a representation, a legal person, separate from your living body. The distinction matters. In everyday speech, we collapse the two, but legal instruments don't. They treat the capital letter name as the locus of rights and obligations. That person is addressed as if it were an object on a ledger. Citizen. The word once conveyed belonging to a city. Now it suggests a bounded role within a polity. Society, from the root that suggests companion or ally, morphs into social structures that bind individuals under norms. Democracy, a beloved term whose literal elements can be traced to people power. Demos, people, kratos, earth's rule. But listen to how its modern usage contorts meaning. Democracy becomes conflated with spectacles of selection and cycles of representation that in practice sometimes substitute motion for meaningful agency. Election, selection. Both words name a process of choosing from prearranged options. The ritual of voting trains bodies to accept pre-designed frames and to locate agency in a periodic exercise rather than continuous authorship. Look at license and certificate. These are instruments that grant permission. Permission, by definition, places the power of allowance outside the individual. To need a license is to depend on an external authority to authorize your action. Names, certificates, licenses, they create legal identity, and they reinforce the idea that certain capacities are not inherent but conferred. Again, language does the binding. Notice the pattern. Across finance, corporate life, and civic vocabulary, we see the same grammar at work. It is a grammar that makes abstract entities real. Bank as edge, corporation as legal body, citizen as bound partner, and then routes human agency through those entities. The repeated architecture is containment, name, categorize, instrument, charge. Institutions teach languages that operationalize containment. That is their design. It keeps systems legible and, for those running them, manageable. For most people, those languages become invisible and auto-reactive. The trick of power is not always to hide. Sometimes it's to make its tools appear ordinary. Let's decode media and education next, because language here operates like conditioning. Television. Tell-a-vision. The very components of the compound word describe an action. Someone tells, the viewer receives a vision. Channel, another term loaded with meaning, suggests a conduit, a fixed route for signals. To be on the channel or off channel borrows the ancient imagery of watercourses and wiring. The media establishes channels through which narratives flow, and these narratives shape the frames people use to talk about themselves and the world. School. Scholar images of school as a place of instruction often obscure that many systems were designed to standardize behavior. Pupil is instructive. A pupil is both a learner and the eye's center, the spot that catches light. We were taught to receive light from prescribed sources, tests, grades, standardized measurements. Language around assessment and score transforms curiosity into a pipeline of judgment. Education becomes calibration. Testing becomes the measure of compliance. Words like pass and fail do more than classify performance. They codify identity. A child who fails internalizes a negative linguistic script that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Entertainment. To enter into a state where the mind is entertained is etymologically to be held within a structure. Entertainment holds. It contains attention. That containment is not neutral when the contents are shaped by commercial and ideological interests. Repetition, repetition, repetition. The media weaponizes it. Semantic satiation is a phenomenon where meaning thins when a word is repeated until it becomes noise. The more certain political or cultural words are repeated, freedom, security, democracy, the more their edges blur and the more they can be filled with whatever programs powerful institutions choose. In medicine, the words are equally shaping. Patient, the very word derives from roots meaning to suffer, interpretive folk etymology. Being a patient names one as someone who receives care and endures. That framing shifts a subject into an object of treatment. Doctor, physician, clinician, all role words assign relational arrays. The knower and the known, the helper and the helped. Diagnosis names you. A label sticks and becomes a lens through which your future actions are imagined by others and yourself. Prescription does more than propose an intervention. It prescribes identity. You are X, take Y. Insurance binds you into a system of mutual assessment, premium indemnity, language that turns unpredictability into commodity. I must flag that when we move through these etymological threads, we are sometimes using scholarship and sometimes using what anthropologists call folk readings, resonant, symbolic, persuasive lines that illuminate patterns even if every historical link remains debated. Where a connection is contested by linguists, I will name it as an interpretive reading. That caveat isn't a dampener, it's honesty. It invites you to use these frames as tools, not as indisputable academic verdicts. Across these systems, the mechanics repeat. A label makes an object, a label makes an obligation. A word removes the subject from the center of agency and places it into a system designed to rotate energy from many living people into concentrated nodes. The same technique works in spiritual institutions. Religion, in many classical renderings, can mean to bind again, interpretive, folk, etymology. Worship, worthship, names the action of ascribing worth as if it's a commodity to be shipped. Churchcraft evolves rituals that compress awe into formula. Language turns living spiritual quest into ritualized habit, then into performance measured by participation metrics, donation tallies, and attendance figures. Why does all of this matter for your brain? Because language sets expectation, and expectation configures neural pathways. Speak a phrase enough times, and the brain reinforces the circuits that anticipate the states named by that phrase. Words become anticipatory scripts. They prime neurochemical responses. The I can't scripts dampen initiative. The I'll wait scripts postpone action. The you're broken scripts narrow hope. When institutions channel language to describe roles, customer, patient, citizen, they create habitual neural responses that match the role. Obedience, passivity, dependency. This is what I mean when I say words are reprogramming your brain. Not in a mystical sense only, but in a literal cognitive sense. Habitual linguistic patterns shape the habit of mind. But I do not want to leave you with only diagnosis. Revelation without remedy becomes despair. The same way these patterns have been cultivated, they can be altered. You are not merely a victim of lexical conditioning. You are a living dictionary capable of revising entries. Language is the tool knitted into your very identity. Reclaimed language is your route back to agency. Start with micro-practices. These are not legal advice or guarantees of wealth or health. They are immediate linguistic interventions that change the patterns your brain runs. First, replace I'm trying with I'm practicing. The first frames effort as tentative, the second frames it as active skill. Try hangs expectation on failure. Practice installs a learning loop. Second, stop speaking primarily in future tense about your becoming. Replace I'll be with I am becoming. And not I'll, a deferred, outsourced future, but a present continuous that roots change now and primes your nervous system to act accordingly. Third, eliminate but where it hollows your affirmation. I am grateful, but cancels the gratitude. Use and to expand rather than negate. Fourth, own your verbs. Avoid passive constructions in self-talk. Replace I was told with I heard or I chose to listen to. Passive voice removes the subject from the action. Active voice restores it. Fifth, a daily 5-word root study. Every morning, pick 5 words that structure your life: mortgage, salary, citizen, patient, career, and spend 3 minutes mapping their roots and possible reframings. This tiny ritual retrains attention. These 5 moves are practical primers, not full liberation. They are ways to start interrupting the autopilot language that programs you. Do them for 2 weeks and notice micro-shifts in feeling and decision. Notice which sentences in your head change shape. Notice how your body responds when your language changes. We also need to look at sacred languages. This is not a call to exoticism. It is a recognition that certain cultures preserve technologies of sound, name, and number precisely because they understood that language is effective. Hebrew letters functioned as both sounds and numbers in systems like gematria. Sanskrit syllables were treated as seed sounds with psychophysiological effects. Latin declared and made law. These traditions were not arbitrary. They were a kind of literacy in the energetic properties of language. That does not mean we should uncritically accept every ancient claim. Some interpretations are speculative, and where scholarship disputes claims, I will flag them as interpretive. Still, the pattern is clear. A concentrated education in language grants power to shape consensus reality. This is the elite advantage. Privilege is not only wealth, it's the habit of having children fluent in the precise languages that plasticize law and finance and credentialing. Private schooling, classical education, legal training, These are not neutral curricula. They teach a register of speech that opens doors in institutions built upon that register. Mass schooling, by contrast, often standardizes rather than transmits mastery, creating a population fluent in compliance but not in sovereign speech. That asymmetry is not necessarily conspiratorial in a diabolic sense. It's structural. It creates an ecosystem in which a small class preserves high-order linguistic capital and uses it to maintain institutional advantage. Hear the moral tone in that. This is not a call to resentment, but to literacy. If you do not have access to elite registers that created the rules, you can still learn the mechanics. Literacy is an instrument of liberation. The knowledge that words operate as programming gives you a way to intervene in your own software. Let me move to a concrete map of how these patterns operate together. Imagine a river, the current of your life. On its banks sit institutions called banks, schools, hospitals, courts. Each bank uses language to place a dam, a channel, a rule. Titles function as locks. Rituals function as gates. A corporation is a machine that converts the flow of human action into concentrated energy that circulates among nodes. The river is made to pass through these machineries of naming. The population learns to swim in a channel that privileges particular exits and closes off others. Now picture reversal, live, evil. One of language's classical tricks is inversion. Say it backwards and sometimes you get a mirror meaning. Playful, certainly. Significant, yes. Reversals work not only as word games, but as conceptual distortions. You are taught to accept that what feeds a legal body is distinct from what feeds your living body. The inversion makes the legal and the living oppose each other. The language sets up false binaries that justify extraction. Containment is the other repeated move. Words like bound, contain, control appear across the lexicons of these institutions. Religion binds, employment binds, insurance binds, license binds. But containment is sold as safety. We bind you so you are safe. The rhetoric persuades the brain to prefer the known cage over the unknown open. That is the genius of the prison. It offers a promise of protection in exchange for compliance. You are probably feeling a mix of awakening and discomfort now. That's normal. Revelation is unsettling. It should be. But discomfort is also a sign the neural groove is being jarred. The question is, what are you going to do with this jar? Will you recoil or will you experiment? Before we go deeper, let me give you another immediate practice that combines study with ritual. Each evening, choose one sentence you used during the day that felt automatic. I'm so busy, I can't afford. I'm just a... And rewrite it into a present tense affirmation that centers agency. I have time for what matters. I create income through this. I am learning and expanding. Say the new sentence aloud once, then once more into your reflection or into the air. This is not a magical formula promising instant riches. It is a practice that bends attention toward possibility. Attention, repeated, becomes habit. Habit, repeated, rewires expectation. Expectation primes action. Action changes outcomes. It is a ladder, and the first rung is language. We have been moving through finances, work, law, media, education, medicine, religion, and the sacred languages that undergird elite fluency. You have the sketches of the system. You have 5 practical micro-moves. But there is a stage I must insist we not skip. Pattern recognition across systems, names, obligations, licenses, repetitive ritual, semantic satiation. These are not isolated tactics. They are the same engineering principle applied in different skins. Money flows, title binds, certificate authorizes, channel transmits, diagnosis labels. Across each, the subject is removed and the system takes charge. That is the thesis in action. Words are the technology of control. This is the crucial bridge. If institutions were purely coercive, we could mount a frontal assault. But the genius of linguistic control is subtle. It makes us believe that the rules are natural. It reprograms desires into the categories of the system. It teaches the brain to prefer the metrics the system measures. To change that, you must change the ambient vocabulary. I need to bring you now into a more intimate frame. Think of your day. Think of how many times you sign a name, agree to a term, call yourself a title the world expects: mother, employee, student, patient. Each time you speak that name, you reinscribe the script in your body. That is why even small shifts matter. One more set of practices now, tactical and immediate, so that revelation becomes action. These 5 micro-practices are ones you can start tonight. First, redeclare your identity in present progressive. Replace I will be with I am becoming. That slight grammatical tilt moves possibility into ongoing presence. Second, purge 3 words from your daily internal vocabulary for a week. Pick words that feed passivity. Try, suffer, can't, should. Notice how the world responds when you stop giving those words air. Third, appoint a root list. 5 words that shaped a major part of your life: mortgage, salary, citizen, patient, career. Each morning, write down 1 root and 2 alternative framings. For mortgage, perhaps home commitment or dwelling covenant. For salary, think value return rather than preservation. These alternatives are not legal maneuvers, they are cognitive tools. Fourth, own your verbs in conversation. Replace I was told with I heard. Replace I lost with I released. Language that returns the agency to you matters more than it seems. Fifth, learn 1 seed syllable or 1 letter of a sacred alphabet as a study practice, not as a religious requirement, but as an exercise in concentrated linguistic attention. For Hebrew or Sanskrit elements, treat them with respect and curiosity. Read reputable resources and consider these studies as techniques to notice how sound shapes mind. Do this as study, not dogma. Remember that scholars and traditions vary on interpretation. Approach with humility and safety. These micro-practices are the first tools in the kit. They will not collapse institutions overnight. They will, however, begin to nudge the brain away from patterns tuned to compliance and toward patterns that expect agency. Over time, repeated micro-shifts yield macro change. We must now push our decoding further into the law, because this is where language turns into enforceable reality. The legal system is a vocabulary of consequences. Contracts are strings of words crafted to produce a certain set of outcomes when parties assent. A contract is a machine made of clauses. Each clause is a lever. Signing is the act that sets the machine into motion. That is why precise language matters there in a way it does not in casual speech. The gap between everyday speech and legal language is not only technical, it's ontological. In law, language brings entities into existence or dissolves them. Corporations exist by statute and declaration. Trusts are established by deed and phrasing. Rights are recognized by named claims. We live among legal fictions and live persons. Call this a paradox of modernity. The legal person, textually created and endowed with rights, circulates in a different register than the living human who grows, feels, and breathes. That separation produces both protection and exploitation. Language does the welding. The same grammar that produces legal binding also trains populations to accept that certain capacities are only available through formal conformity. This is where rhetoric becomes ritual and ritual becomes governance. And yet the law is not simply a conspiracy of elites. It is also a shared structure that makes complex social life possible. The issue is not whether law should exist, but whose language crafts the law and to what ends. The elite advantage is the ability to craft language that confers persistent benefits. The rest of society tends to adopt a language after the fact. Learning to read the grammar of law is therefore a survival skill. It is literacy that expands the range of options you can see. We are approaching a deeper layer, time and calendar. How do months and days name your life? Look at January, named for Janus, the two-faced god of doorways and beginnings. February has associations with purification rites in certain traditions. March carries Mars. The months are laden with mythic residues that orient action. The calendar divides life into parcels that are sellable. Time becomes debt when we monetize hours and build salary around quantified periods. Clock time slices attention into units that can be billed, scheduled, and sold. The very language of timing, appointment, deadline, shift, maps attention into commodified blocks. There's a whole other set of practices, semantic satiation, future tense bias, passive voice, that function like cognitive adware. Repetition hollows meaning until the word is a shell that can be filled with chosen content. Future tense bias trains people to live in deferredness. Passive voice removes actors. These syntactic traps are subtle but effective. They are spread as habits through schooling, media narrative, and bureaucratic forms. Your brain learns them the way it learns any grammar, by exposure, repetition, and reward. I have given you a map through the first half of the territory. Finance, work, media, education, medicine, religion, law, calendar. I have shown you the recurring patterns and offered immediate practices to disturb them. You have 5 micro-practices you can begin tonight. You have a moral framing that honors the complexity. Institutional language can be both necessary and constraining. And you have the key insight. Phrases you use matter to your neural patterns. They are not cosmetic. Where we go next is deeper. We will follow the flow into the subtle economies of naming, into the mechanics of contracts and certificates, into the ways sacred alphabets preserve technologies of sound, and into the tactical grammar of reclaiming agency through language repair. We will meet the rhetorical devices the elite preserve and the tricks of semantic collapse used in mass media. We will trace how calendars monetize attention and how prayer, when stripped of its living interior, becomes ritualized compliance. Right now, as you sit with what you have heard, notice how your body reacts when you say mortgage aloud. Notice the physical sensation when you say employee. If you felt a clench, that is real data. Language does not live only in the head. It animates physiology. That is why small changes matter. Relearning words is not sentimental. It's biological repatterning. Prepare to go further. In the next movement, we will decode law deep into the contract clause. We will unspool the ways corporate bodies are animated by language and how that animation extracts life. And we will explore sacred numerology and its modern resonances, not to claim supernatural power, but to show a technology of attention conserved across cultures. We will also expand your toolkit beyond micro-practices into tactical rituals and community frameworks that let you practice sovereignty with others while staying grounded in legal and medical prudence. You have the beginning, Abracadabra. I create as I speak. You now know the principle. The question that follows is practical. Will you let your daily sentences keep writing your life, or will you edit the text? The next step is not abstract, it's concrete. We will dismantle specific clauses, read the small print of public language, and propose new grammars for living in a way that is neither naive nor purely oppositional. The goal is not to tear down everything around you. It's to learn to speak as a being who participates rather than being merely managed. Hold that. Breathe with the recognition that words are powerful, but remember, power can be learned and redirected. We are entering the workshop where we will learn precisely how to do that. Hold that. Breathe with the recognition that words are powerful, but remember, power can be learned and redirected. We are entering the workshop where we will learn precisely how to do that. Now look closer at contracts, those long, dry documents you scroll past to click agree. A contract is not neutral prose. It is a machine in which each sentence is a lever and each defined term is a cam. Read the word indemnify. It sounds clinical. In practice, it is a transfer of risk. Indemnify asks one party to carry the cost, the harm, the loss. In plain terms, it asks someone to hold another harmless at personal expense. Hold harmless. The phrase itself makes the holder into a buffer. Legal language takes social obligations and turns them into legal obligations through naming and repetition. Consider force majeure, a lofty phrase that means an extraordinary event beyond control. The clause removes accountability by shifting the consequences into a nameless category called acts of God, or unforeseeable events. The language creates escape hatches. Consider notwithstanding. This tiny word reverses the program. It says, despite what you just read, do this instead. In contracts, a single notwithstanding can rearrange the field of play. The lesson is simple. Words in law do things. They don't just describe what exists, they bring arrangements into being. They designate who carries burdens and who is insulated. Observe defined terms. Contracts love definitions. Company, customer, services, loss. Definitions freeze meaning. They remove ambiguity, purposefully. That removal of ambiguity is a virtue when agreements require precision, but it is also a tool. By defining, lawmakers create the object to be regulated. Look at capitalization. Capitalized terms in a contract are not rhetorical flourishes. They are legal constructs. Your name in all caps is a defined thing. That thing has rights and obligations anchored in the text. The living human and the legal instrument are not the same, though one often stands for the other. Learn to read the definitions. Notice who the contract makes primary and who it renders secondary. Notice who the company always wins for and who the customer always pays for. That pattern is a linguistic architecture. Do not take this as an argument against contracting. The point is literacy. The same language that constructs corporate protections also makes commerce possible. The question is not whether contracts should exist, but whether you understand the verbs they use on you. Before you sign, read who the subject is, who acts, who grants, who waives. If you do, notice whether you mean the natural person or the legal persona defined elsewhere. That distinction matters. Ask for clarity, ask for counsel, and if necessary, negotiate the definitions that shape your obligations. I am not giving legal advice. I am pointing to how language constructs consent. Turn now to corporations and the literal animation of bodies by words. Corporation is not merely a business type. The root corpus, body, explains why we use corporate body. A corporation is a body in law, born by filing, sustained by charter, animated by words on paper. Perpetual succession is a phrase that gives the body ongoing life across generations. Personhood, limited liability, perpetual existence, these are legal qualities created by statutory language. The paper creates a creature that can own, sue, be sued, contract, and accumulate. Language brings into being an entity that can outlive the human agents who birthed it. This legal animation means something profound for how energy flows. Corporations collect attention, labor, and money. They circulate those into scales and forms that individual human beings rarely can. The grammar that allows that circulation is precise, specialized, and taught in elite corridors, law schools, business schools, chartered firms. That specialized language is a form of capital. Children raised in households where those words are natural inherit an advantage. They grow fluent in the grammar that creates corporate power. Meanwhile, for most people, corporate language remains opaque, a black box whose levers are unknown. How did that gap form? Two mechanisms. First, education that privileges certain registers. Latin phrases, legalese, the habit of defining, these are taught in privileged institutions. Second, the packaging of power into formal vocabularies not accessible to the public by default. The effect is structural, not accidental. A small class preserves linguistic capital and uses it to validate legal and financial structures. The remedy is not resentment. It is literacy. Learn the language. Learn the register. The more you can translate the law into plain verbs, the less those clauses act like spells cast upon you. Let us step into numerology and sacred letters, territory that some will call mystical, some will call cultural practice, and scholars will insist requires nuance. I will not assert supernatural claims. I will point out a technology. Across cultures, people treated sound and symbol as instruments that shape mind. Hebrew letters carried numeric values. That system, gematria, linked words by number and invited interpretive lattices. Sanskrit seed syllables, bija mantras, were preserved as concentrated sounds intended to focus attention or catalyze physiological states. Latin ritual declarations carried juridical force in medieval courts and ecclesiastical settings. These are historical facts in the sense that these practices existed. Their standing as a source of metaphysical power is interpretive and contested. If you want a practical and non-dogmatic experiment, start small. Pick a single letter from a language that has both phonetic and symbolic weight to you. Maybe the first letter of a name or a word that matters. Spend a week noticing how that sound shapes your emotional register as you speak it, hear it, write it. Try a simple count. Write the number associated with that letter in gematria systems you can research. With caution, many methods exist, and see whether grouping words by number reveals resonance to you. Treat it as an attention practice. Notice patterns, not miracles. The exercise trains sensitivity to how symbol and sound alter expectation. That sensitivity is an asset. A short caution here. Many etymological links we use as rhetorical levers are folk etymology, interpretive, folk etymology, or speculative readings. Flag them to yourself. Use them as lenses, not as blind certainties. Where scholarship exists, consult it. Where contestation remains, recognize the claim as one interpretive layer among many. That intellectual humility protects you from becoming dogmatic and keeps your practice useful. We must attend to time because the calendar is a powerful linguistic device. Names of months are not neutral. They arrive from myth and power. January, Janus, opens doors. March, Mars, signals a god of war whose month has martial connotations, interpretive folk etymology. The fiscal year, quarterly reporting, tax seasons. These are calendrical constructs that translate time into financial obligation. The calendar parcels life into sellable blocks. Your hours are monetized into billable time, your days into shifts, your weeks into scheduled productivity. Language that slices time into commodities teaches the brain to plan life as a sequence of transactions. How do you reclaim temporal sovereignty? Start with time vocabulary. Replace busy as a badge of worth with engaged as a choice. Replace kill time with rest time. When you schedule, name the block by value, not by function. Deep creative work, 2 hours rather than work block. Reassign holy days. Make a micro-ritual that resists market temporalization. An hour once a week where your schedule is intentionally uncommodified. Call that hour a sacred interval, if that language helps. Small shifts in naming can change the brain's prioritization. Now let us assemble a tactical grammar, a practical toolkit that aligns with what I've shown. This is the how section. Specific verbal moves, rewrites, and practices to interrupt the programming and retrain neural expectations. Here are 7 high-impact interventions you can adopt immediately. They build on the micro-practices you already learned and extend them into social and contractual contexts. 1. The definition drill. Before you sign or assent to anything, identify the defined terms and translate them into plain English. What does effective date mean for your life? How does termination change access? This is literacy, not rebellion. If a form defines you as a customer with broad waivers, flag it. Seek counsel if the stakes are high. Knowledge here is safety. This is not legal advice. Consult a lawyer for legal interpretation. 2. The agency rewrite. Convert 3 sentences you commonly say into active voice present progressive forms. Examples: I will try, I am practicing, I was told, I heard, I can't, I am learning how. Speak these rewrites aloud daily. The grammar changes expectation. 3. The calendar reframe. Rename one recurring temporal unit in your life for 2 months. Call your Monday morning check-in a creative commissioning and treat it with ritual. Mark the change on your calendar with the new term. Observe whether your nervous system shifts its orientation to that period. 4. The semantic fast. Choose 5 words to stop using for a week. Candidate words: try, can't, busy, should, oh. When you catch yourself using them, pause and pick a replacement. Keep a log. The fast trains awareness. 5. The root list lab. Every morning, pick 5 words that structure your day: mortgage, salary, patient, citizen, career. For each, write the most literal root you can find and then offer 2 alternative framings. Example: mortgage, home commitment, or dwelling covenant. Salary, value return, or service exchange. This reframe practice is not legal redefinition, it's cognitive redirection. 6. The vocal ownership practice. Once a day, read aloud a paragraph of your own writing in first-person present progressive. Notice the shift in posture. Speaking in I am becoming. Tones reorients felt agency. 7. The community study circle. Form a weekly small group session, no more than 6 people, where you decode 1 institutional text each week. A bank statement, a job contract, a school policy, a medical consent form. Translate together from legalese into lived meaning. Keep it oriented to learning, not conspiracy. Share findings, resources, and recommended professional referrals. These 7 practices make sovereignty social and sustainable. They are not instant enchantments. They are habits that, repeated, alter expectation and attention. Now, 5 words to stop using and 5 words to adopt. These lists are concrete and immediately actionable. Stop using try but sorry as default preface, can't, oh, as identity statement. Adopt, instead, practice, and thank you, specific, learning, invest, in my time, value. Notice the pattern. Replacing words that imply passivity, negation, or indebtedness with words that imply motion, addition, gratitude, and ownership. Language shifts the scaffolding of identity. We also need a short, safe, daily ritual you can perform that stitches these changes together. Call it the 3-point declaration. Every morning, stand, breathe, and speak 3 present tense sentences aloud. 2 minutes max. Keep it simple and truthful. Example script. I'm becoming someone who chooses with clarity. I'm practicing my words so they serve life. I commit my attention today to what aligns with my values. Say each once, then sit and take 2 breaths. Do not promise miracles. Notice how your physiology responds over a week. That embodied feedback is your data. Remember the safety notes. Do not rely on verbal rituals as substitutes for professional legal or medical counsel. Do not use language shifts to attempt to evade lawful obligations or to manipulate others. This work is about personal sovereignty, the reclaiming of inner register, not about avoidance of responsibility. We must push deeper into the symbolic economy, where naming becomes extraction. Corporations quantify labor in hours and outputs. Schools quantify progress in grades and standardized scores. Hospitals quantify bodies into charts and diagnostic codes. Each metric is a linguistic device that translates life into comparable units. The translation makes exchange possible, but it also creates a lens that notices only what fits the scale. Language then becomes a filter. What the measure names becomes real. What it excludes becomes invisible. To counter this, practice countermetrics in private. Define success for a day by 3 things that the system's measures do not mirror. For instance, did you laugh today? Did you make something for the joy of it? Did you connect without agenda? Name these metrics, speak them, and celebrate them. Language will slowly expand your attention to include what those other systems omit. There is a moral register to this work. Awareness can breed either arrogance or compassion. Use revelation to pay care where it is due. If you spot that a friend or family member is embedded in a linguistic pattern that harms them, do not weaponize the discovery. Instead, ask questions. Use curiosity. Try, what does that word mean to you when you say it? People need safe rooms to name their own cages. Now, one of the most urgent practices, civic speech. When political language becomes a drumbeat of slogans, the neural groove deepens quickly. Semantic satiation turns loaded words into effective triggers rather than vehicles of meaning. The antidote is deliberate definition. When a public phrase is repeated, freedom, security, law and order, stop and ask, what precise act does this demand? Translate the phrase into verbs. Security could mean a set of policies that reduce exposure to certain threats. Freedom could mean the capacity to act without undue constraint on property, speech, and association. Turning nouns into verbs reduces the spell-like quality of slogans. Another practical practice, interrogate headlines for presuppositions. Headlines often frame events implicitly. Market tumbles as economy falters. The presupposition is that markets encode total systemic truth. Ask, who benefits if attention leaves the ground-level human effects of that tumble? Who benefits if the narrative centers the market rather than the people? Reframe the headline in a way that centers lived experience and say it aloud. Now a close look at worship language and the spiritual register. Remember, I am not denigrating faith. I am critiquing the institutionalization of spiritual language into ritualized compliance. Worship can be translated literally as worthship, interpretive folk etymology, an idea that language ships value somewhere. Ritual can ship devotion into institutional metrics, attendance, tithes, programs. This is not to condemn institutional community, it is to point out the mechanism. The remedy is interiorization. Prayer that is habit alone can become a label. Prayer that requalifies your inner grammar, that moves I am small into I belong, is transformative. Center practice, not mere performance. Here is a short prayer-like declaration you can use as a linguistic reset if prayer is part of your life. I claim the kingdom within. I speak truth to my life. I am seen, I am known. I steward what I have. Use whatever theological language aligns with your beliefs. The key is the move from passive petitioning into present-tense declaration of interior reality. We must also briefly examine how institutional schooling trains linguistic compliance. The classroom models a pedagogy of question and answer, teacher as knower, student as recipient. This grammar shapes a posture of receptivity rather than authorship. Rewild learning. Practice asking your students, children, or colleagues, what would you teach me about this? Reverse the hierarchy sometimes. Encourage generative speech. Make a small classroom lab where answers are treated as drafts, not final authority. This playful inversion trains creative agency. By now you can see the structure: reveal, decode, practice, community. We are nearing the synthesis. Across finance, law, corporations, education, medicine, media, religion, and time, the same pattern recurs. Naming creates objects. Naming assigns roles. Naming roots energy. Language makes obligations real. Language hides. Language reveals. The dark side of your words is not a malevolent force outside you. It is a grammatical habit inside you, molded by systems. That is the good news. You can change habits. I will now offer 3 further tactical resources you can use immediately to escalate your practice beyond the individual. First, create a lexicon of reclamation document. Start with a list of 10 institutional words that structure your life. For each, write 3 reframes and 1 action that embodies the reframe. Example: patient, person in recovery. Action: ask your provider to include person-first language in all notes you receive. Share the document with one trusted friend and ask for feedback. Make the lexicon collaborative. Second, begin a contract translation hour in your community. Once a month, gather a small group and a lawyer willing to donate a session. Bring anonymized, non-sensitive clauses and ask for plain language translations. Use the hour to learn how common clauses operate, not to plan evasion. Know your local laws. Consult professionals. The goal is community literacy. Third, develop a daily audio diary. Use your phone to record 1 minute of present respective declarations each morning. Listen back weekly. The audio becomes a mirror, audio evidence of change. It also trains your vocal patterns. Your voice is a vector. One last cautionary layer: conspiratorial thinking seduces because it simplifies complex social architectures into a single evil will. The model we are mapping is structural and rhetorical, not metaphysical. There are motivated actors, there are anonymous systems. Power is distributed and often self-reinforcing rather than conspiratorial in the lurid sense. Resist the temptation to reduce complexity to caricature. Complexity demands clarity, not panic. Use revelation to build competence. We started with 1 line: Abracadabra. I create as I speak. That is the seed. We unfolded the thesis: words program brains. We decoded the ways institutions use language to root value and obedience. We traced patterns across finance, work, law, media, medicine, religion, and time. We offered concrete micro-practices, 7 tactical moves, a daily ritual, lexicon work, community models, and cautions about contested etymologies and legal medical prudence. You are not left only to solo work. Language, after all, is social. It changes fastest in interaction. Invite others as colleagues, not as followers. Teach what you learn, but teach humbly. Translate legalese into plain verbs for friends. Replace I can't with I am learning in conversation. Model the grammar you want to propagate. Let us close with a short, simple rehearsal you can speak aloud now. Say it with clarity and attention, not as magic, but as commitment. I speak in ways that serve life. I choose words that open pathways, not cages. I reclaim my time, my name, my agency. I practice daily until my speech and my life match. And one final line, the returning chorus you began with: Abracadabra, not a childish trick but a principle. The words you habitually use are patterns that shape expectation. Expectation sculpts neural pathways. Your neural pathways bias your decisions. Your decisions write your life. Uncover the dark side of your words. Notice them, decode them, and edit them. If this reframed your thinking, take 1 step now. Pick a single word in your life that, if you renamed it, would change how you move. Put that word in the comments below and name its new form. I will read as many as I can and highlight some in the next session. Subscribe to join this work. We will go deeper into frequency codes, contract clauses line by line, and the sound practices that cultures preserve for good reason. And we'll do it with care, scholarly humility, and a fierce commitment to personal agency. You now have a map, tools, and company. The choice is practical. Will you let your daily sentences keep writing your life, or will you take the pen, speak differently, live differently, uncover the dark side of your words, and reclaim the light they can be?